Hi, this is Professor Trusky. Welcome to Modern Art History. In these presentations, you will see me in the lower left corner talking and giving the lecture. I highly recommend getting a notebook with a pen and paper and writing down notes as I give these lectures, okay? You may need to take breaks every now and then and walk around and then come back and push play again just to keep a fresh mind and just so you're alert and paying attention. Now, this course is going to be an interesting course because there's a lot going on in it. With modern art history, there's a lot of changes that take place, so why don't I just get into talking? Also, if you have questions regarding any of these presentations, just email me those questions and I will respond to you, okay? So let's get started. Now, with the introduction to modern art, it began around the 1880s towards the end of Impressionism and lasted till the 1960s to 1970s. However, your textbook usually goes into contemporary times, which is not unheard of for modern art history classes. The birth of modernism and modern art can be traced back to the Industrial Revolution, a period that lasted from the 18th to 19th century. During this time, there were rapid changes in manufacturing, transportation, and technology. These changes greatly affected the social, economic, and cultural conditions of life in Western Europe, North America, and eventually the rest of the world. Forms of transportation such as railroads, steam engines, and subways changed the way people lived, worked, and traveled, expanding their worldviews, curiosity into other cultures, and access to new ideas. This was a great time of prosperity. Cities grew as workers migrated to cities for industrial jobs. Prior to the 19th century, artists were most often commissioned to make artwork by wealthy patrons or institutions like the church. Much of this art depicted religious or mythological scenes that told stories of that were intended to instruct the viewers. During the 19th century, modern artists rejected previous Renaissance-based traditions in favor of new forms of artistic experimentations. This was due partly to the Industrial Age Revolution and also the many wars that took place. For instance, there was the French Revolutions that took place in 1789 to 1799, then again in 1830 to 1848. Even though these were a bit before modernism, there was a creation of art that inspired modern artists. There were also areas of the world being overtaken for their raw materials. Then there was also the World Wars, World War I and World War II. As we will see, some artists will create their work as an escape from this reality. Others will either be exiled from their homelands or participate in the wars, or they will just be impacted by their surrounding environments. All of these reasons will help to create movements and styles that impact certain times during modernism. Modern artists used new materials, new techniques of painting, and developed new theories about how art should reflect their world and what their functions as artists should be. Many artists started to make art about people, places, or ideas of what interested them and what they had direct experience with. With the publication of psychologist Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams in 1899 and the popularization of the idea of a subconscious mind, many artists began exploring dreams, symbolism, and personal iconography, such as avenues for the depiction of their subject experience. Let's get started with Chapter 1, The Origins of Modernism. In 1877 to 78, John Ruskin was one of Britain's most famous critics, and as he was reviewing a show, he came across John McNeill Whistler's Nocturne in Black and Gold, The Falling Rocket, which is what you're looking at now. Ruskin gave it a terrible review and was quite vicious in his words, stating that the founder of the gallery should not have admitted his work into the show and that Whistler was ill-educated, conceited, and was basically flinging a pot of paint into the public space. Whistler, who was wanting to sell his painting, was obviously not very happy with this and tried to sue Ruskin for libel. Whistler was hoping to receive money plus court costs for the suit. Since Ruskin and Whistler were both well known, it was a highly publicized trial which caused public embarrassment to Whistler. Despite the fact that the jury ridiculed and mocked Whistler's painting, they still ruled in his favor. But it was proved to be an empty victory when he realized that he was only awarded a farthing, which is basically a half cent, and the court costs that he had to split. Now for Ruskin, who is the critic here, what he wanted to say was like what he believed was great art was accomplished chiefly through an artwork's ability to represent nature faithfully. He believed that art had the power to improve society. This type of work would promote moral and virtue as well as aesthetic value and pleasure. Ruskin saw none of this in Whistler's painting. Now Whistler, who is the artist, his intent was trying to capture the explosive fireworks that were set off above Thames through expressive brushstrokes and brushwork. Whistler's understanding of the purpose of art was very different from Ruskin's. He believed in art for art's sake, believing that art should not serve a specific purpose, and by doing so would detract from its aesthetic purity. This trial, as entertaining as it was, raised important issues for the history of modern art. It questioned the role of art in society. Should art serve a higher purpose than ourselves with profound meaning and/or contribute to the morals of our society? Or should art be made for one's own pleasure, meaning the artist's pleasure or the viewer's pleasure? It also questioned the arts critic's role and influence of the art that the art critic had in society during this time. And it reflected the growing interest in art and its expanding market. The viewpoints brought up during this trial continued long after it ended, with artists who formed or allied themselves into different movements that represented both sides of this debate. The role of the art critic. Art criticism began in the 18th century in response to the growing number of public exhibitions of art at salons or venues. Before the 18th century, there were private galleries for the wealthy collectors of nobility. It was usually only religious art that was displayed to the public, but by the 18th century, artwork was now being displayed by art dealers and auctioneers. There were large-scale exhibitions being shown throughout Europe and France, which were referred to as salons. The Paris Salon took place every 2 years and would exhibit academic work along with works by famous artists from other countries. As the mass public began to go to these exhibitions, they were often confused by what they saw and lacked the knowledge to fully understand the works in front of them. To help viewers understand the artworks, critics began to write reviews that were published. Now at this time there were 5 main genres being painted. There were portraits, landscapes, historical subjects, still lifes, and genre paintings, meaning scenes of everyday life. Historical paintings were held in the highest respect because to paint history, the artist needs to be educated in the history they were painting, and they need the highest degree of technical skill. Most history paintings have nudes or semi-nude figures in them, so the artist also needed to be experienced in life drawing and anatomy. Also, many historical painters were experts at landscape painting since that provided many of the settings for these historical themes. The bourgeois, meaning the growing middle class, were now collecting art. They particularly preferred small works with themes suitable to a domestic interior. There was a new marketplace developing as never before. The economy was growing in Western Europe with the spread of international trade in manufacturing goods. Thus, more and more citizens acquired new money and wealth. There were 2 early styles that proved to be influential in the forming of modern art: Romanticism and Neoclassicism. Romanticism is a theory, practice, and style of the Romantic art of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, usually opposed to Classicism. Romanticism displayed the emotional capability in humans. Artists and theorists of this style believed art to be the expression of an individual's will. There was a rebellion against social rules and conventions. There was also a heightened interest in nature, emphasis on the individual's expression of emotion, and imagination over emulation. An early piece by William Blake titled Nebuchadnezzar from 1795 displays the Romanticism concept nicely. Although it is historically representing a theme from the Bible, Blake inserts his own vision of the way he interprets his scene, this particular scene. And you can see that in the way the curves are draping the figure here. It just accentuates the emotion. And you could see the expression in his face and also the tension of this big toe coming out. All of that displays Romanticism very nicely. Neoclassicism also influenced modern art by using the foundations of Renaissance and Baroque art, the opposite of Romanticism. In the painting by Jacques-Louis David, which is what you're looking at here, The Oath of Herati from 1784, David and his followers tended to dominate the genre of history painting. David used moralistic subjects surrounding the French Revolution and the republic virtues of early Rome. According to the story, an agreement was reached during the war between Rome and Alba Longa from 672 to 640 BCE, where only 3 warriors from each party were engaged to combat. Rome was represented by 3 brothers from the Horatius family. Only the youngest survived the battle and was victorious. This is the moment when the brothers are handed their swords by their father and swear to fight to the death. We see Horace and his 3 sons. They are taking an oath to stay together and fight against the other family. The men are on the left side of the picture. They are proud and strong. They are linear and angular. While on the right side, we see the women. The wife and daughters are seen as weak. They are soft, covered in fabric. They are sad and curvilinear. The women respond with emotion, anticipating the tragic fate of their heroes, while the men respond with a sense of duty. And you can see here the angular stiffness of the Stoic figures, which emulate the stiffness of these swords, the strength. And then we see the curvilinear bodies and the draping of the fabric that accentuate the emotion of the females. Now, during the French Revolution, this painting was seen as a symbol of self-sacrifice for one's country and higher ideal. It was a sense of civic duty and patriotism that was very important early on for David. We see his use of rich colors and how he treats the figures as if they were sculptural. However, he is influenced by Renaissance art. David breaks with the tradition by altering the perspective. Perspective is what it creates the illusion of visual depth by using a system of representing 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. And in David's painting, we see a slight manipulation in perspective, as if he created a small stage and compressed it to appear as if it's an ancient relief sculpture. It was this manipulation in perspective that changed the attitude, which eventually led to abstract art in the 20th century. Angst was a pupil of David's and followed mostly in his classical tradition. Unlike David, Angst did not support moralizing themes in history. This is his painting Grand Odalisque from 1814. Angst was not adverse to sensuality. Here we see one of the most famous nudes in art history. He also has one of the largest spines in art history. You can see here the female figure with her spine elongated in such a way that it emphasizes this arch in her back. She is very exotic, elongated, beautiful nude. She is modestly turning away from us, but looking at us as if we shouldn't be looking at her, as if we, you and me, the viewer, are acting like a voyeur. Angst was an artist who believed in duty, classicism, tradition, the classics of literature, a kind of linear style that was very carefully controlled and finished in his pictorial surfaces that did not communicate at all the work that he spent doing it, meaning that you couldn't see the brush strokes and you couldn't see the labor that was put into the work. It was very fine and finished. The follower of Angres seemed to favor the church and the French monarchy, which had been destroyed by the French Revolution. His use of colors brilliantly combined classical clarity with romantic sensuousness. This is a line hunt done in 1861 by Eugene Delacroix. He was also a pupil of David, and more so than Angres, Delacroix was an artist who believed in motion. He believed in emotion, romanticism, color, free brushwork, and informal composition. We see many brushstrokes in the paintings of Delacroix, and the followers of his paintings favored the new Republican and the libertarian political traditions started by the French Revolution. Before the development of mass-produced photography, Romantic artists liked to use printmaking as a way of creating an edition of prints that had the spontaneity of drawing. The two most popular techniques to Romantic artists were aquatint and lithography. Here we see Theodore Géricault's Horse Devoured by a Lion, which is an example of lithography. Here we see another etching. This one is by Goya, titled This is Worse, Plate 37 from the Disasters of War. Goya was a romantic history artist who created portraits of the Spanish royal family and also bleak visions of fantastical, monstrous, depraved humans. This particular cycle of prints, The Disaster of War, shows Spain's uprising against Napoleon's army. Goya's medium and expressivity make his disasters of war emblematic of Romanticism. Romantic artists were also drawn to the landscape painting due to the beauty and power of nature. Painting landscapes allowed artists to represent the awesomeness of nature through creating distant horizon lines, giving the illusion of vast space, and creating powerful clouds and skies. These landscapes display the fragility of civilization, and you can see that here. You see the vast sky here, these large trees, and look how this tree is towering over. And then you see here this small person, this small human traveling along this man-made road. So it's very small in this large, vast landscape. In the painting up top, John Constable's The Hay Wain, we see the distance of the landscape and the sky. The figures and the human elements are just a small part of the painting. And again, just like we saw in the previous slide, where I had the same exact one below, in Theodore Rousseau's Edge of the Forest, we again see the landscape and the human elements almost seem such like a small piece of existence in this painting. And it was more about the landscape itself than anything else. This is Millet's Angelus. Millet often painted humans in his landscapes. They were often laborers, but he visually treated these common workers with dignity, in a way reminiscent of classical or biblical heroes. He ennobles them. He raises his workers up beyond their, at the time, socially accepted status. This viewpoint greatly inspired artists such as Vincent van Gogh, which many of you are already familiar with. William Turner was an artist who often dealt with the destructive forces of nature and the changing conditions of light and atmosphere in his landscapes. Here we see the burning of the House of Parliament. His dramatic painterly style is on the verge of abstraction, and it no doubt helped to influence 20th century art. It's interesting to note that Ruskin praised Turner as one of the most significant modern artists. Now we may ask, why was Turner viewed in such a high esteem while Whistler's painting was publicly trashed? Both artists are on the verge of abstraction with their dramatic expressionistic style of painting. One is painting fireworks, the other is painting fire. But it's the way the two artists chose their compositions, their handling of space. Even though Turner's painting is violent, we still see more of a classical landscape with the horizon line close to the center. We see a foreground, middle ground, and background. Turner's work conveys the awesomeness of nature that Ruskin likes so much, while Whistler's painting forces the viewer into the fireworks themselves. We see the sky with very little foreground. The horizon line is much lower on the canvas, taking away from the traditional or classical landscape. It also shows the fireworks over an amusement park attended by workers and middle class, which at the time seemed like a cheap pleasure of urban life. Ruskin could see no beauty or value in this. Ruskin, again, was the critic. And again, if you look to the left, you see in Turner's painting a much more traditional landscape. People could easily relate to that, even though it was violent. You see this awesomeness of nature of the fire. Where in Whistler's painting, it's very much more unconventional. All right, you see a lot of sky with very little foreground. Now, one thing to remember is that neoclassicism's objective rationality and romanticism's subjective expressionism both help to form a good grounding for modernism.